there's been a lot of conversation going on about supervision and why it's important, why we require it, should we require it as an ACSD group. And so we thought, let's have some conversation around this, more so some presentation, because some of you have had conversations. Some of you have had conversation in your regions. I know our region has had it. Several others have spoken to me that their regions have had these conversations in kind of an official way. So we're trying to just understand the nature of it and its benefit to our work. And so that's why we are meeting today in this fashion. We'll keep our eye. Here's another person coming in, another person joining us. And we'll keep our eye on that as well. But let's have a word of prayer, please. Thanking God for his providing technical means for us to connect. Appreciate it. Heavenly Father, we are grateful to be together this morning. We're grateful for the friends like Pam and Rob who continue to build into us as directors. And it's your Holy Spirit, though, that we want to listen to, Father, as we try to understand the importance of supervision, what it can do for our ministries. And so we ask you to guide our thinking, guide our words, guide all that is presented today by the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. Thank you for Rob. Thank you for the center there, the Weborg Center at North Park. Pray your continued blessing upon it, even as it continues to gear up for another season of a cohort that will be coming in fresh this summer. So bless this time. God, you are good to us. Thank you for bringing us together in spite of our technical difficulties. With us in this hour, we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. So I'm going to turn it right over to you, Rob. It's just wonderful to see all these friends here. So I'm going to look forward to changing my screen around and seeing who's all here.
It's great to be with you. So let me just take a moment. I'm going to introduce myself, and then we'll kind of make our way into the topic. So I'm Rob. I am the director for the Weborg Center for Spiritual Direction. Have been doing that coming up with 3 years now. It is a gift to be in that role. We are planning on welcoming our 19th cohort this summer. So that essentially means for 19 years, the Weborg Center has been training spiritual directors. And it's a gift to do that. So I am a director, have been a director for quite a while. I have been in supervision like you. I have watched and talked with supervisors. I'm also a former covenant pastor of 30 years, served mostly in the Canada Covenant. And I'm currently also, in addition to the role of the Weborg Center, Associate Superintendent of the Canada Covenant. So I'm kind of wear two hats. Both those roles are half-time, and I enjoy both of those things that I do. I'm calling today from Grand Rapids, Michigan. That's where I live. So I do some commuting over to Chicago. I do some commuting up to Canada. So it is, again, a really gift to be with you. Anytime I'm with directors, I always feel like, oh, I'm among friends. So it is a really good thing to be together. So I have been asked by the Association of Covenant Spiritual Directors to address the topic of supervision as it relates to the practice of doing spiritual direction. So in a short phrase, it's why supervision? So we're not going to look at today as what is supervision, though that'll come up. And we're not going to dig too far into how do we do it, though that might come up as well. So really the primary focus is, as directors, why might supervision be a wise and a gracious habit for us to participate in? So I would say right away that I am not an expert on supervision. So thumbs down on your screens for everybody. I'm just kidding. I am a learner like you. I think supervision plays an important role, but I see my role today as a host. And I hope I can be a good host for a robust, important conversation about the importance and significance of supervision, both peer supervision and individual supervision. So my hope for us today is that you'll join in and we'll talk together, because I think our combined wisdom is so much better than any one person's individual wisdom when it comes to these topics. So I'll also say that a lot of the way I think about supervision has been shaped by a person, and her name is Lucy Abbott Tucker. So in conversation with Lucy, in her workshop on supervision, in watching her give supervision, I've kind of picked up some stuff from Lucy. So if it sounds like Lucy Abbott Tucker, it's probably Lucy Abbott Tucker, I'm just saying. But so I hope we'll have a good conversation. So I'm going to share my screen and just a few slides. I want to kind of make some opening comments, and then we're going to do a breakout room conversation today. So supervision and spiritual direction. So I want to start with this. If our desire is to offer direction to the best of our abilities, if we want to do this ministry well, if we're committed to paying attention to our growth in the art and skill of direction, then what? Just ponder that for a bit. Then what? If we want to offer and sit with people, if we want to offer this ministry well, then what? I think part of the answer to that then what question is that we will need to have in place practices and experiences as directors in this ministry that support and sustain us in the good practice of sitting with people. Examples could be things that support our ministry, continuing education. That would be a good practice for us. Being in direction ourselves, that would be a good thing to do. Spiritual practices that nurture our life with God. Space in our life that we have in order to notice the movement of God in our own life. And of course, the supervision. So maybe one way to think about the then what question is to think about having some sort of trellis, some sort of structure that supports our own continued growth as directors. And it's going to be different from everyone. There's hundreds of ways of supporting the plant through a trellis. But what I kind of been thinking about over the last couple of weeks is the reality of what are the things that we do that nurture us, that keep us growing as directors. So you can think about that. So one of the things is that's good for us, I believe, is some form of supervision. Supervision, is one of the ways that directors honor the vocation of listening for the movement of God in other people. Direction, as I know, it's really hard work. I mean, it's holy work. It's beautiful work, but it's a particularly hard kind of work. And it's best undertaken, I think, with the support of other people around us, supervisors, peers, and maybe even another director. Lucy Abbott Tucker says that supervision supports the ongoing growth of the spiritual director in themselves and in the practice of spiritual direction. It is a process that includes three things. Supervision helps three areas: education. Through supervision, peer and individual, we are introduced to new concepts. Maybe we're introduced to new perspectives, new practices as directors. So supervision kind of opens the door to our own learning. Secondly, supervision is the place of consultation. I'm sure if we just paused and said, does anybody have a direction session where you were puzzled, where you were bored, where you were confused, where you were fill in the blank? So supervision allows us that place with confidence and confidentiality for us to ask our questions about doing the craft or direction. And then thirdly, supervision is that place of self-reflection. It's the place where we take what's going on in us into a relationship or into our peer group, and we can unpack what it is that's in us that may in fact be a barrier to good direction. So those three things, education, consultation, and self-reflection, are important parts of supervision. And that's why I think as an association, we say and ask, are you in some form of supervision? Because it's part of the trellis that supports our ongoing growth as directors. So one of the answers, I've already said it, to the what then is some form of supervision. So I'd like to have a conversation. I want to put us into breakout rooms really quickly. Is how has supervision supported your growth as directors? So how has supervision supported your growth as spiritual directors? So let's take just 10, 15 minutes. I'll put you into groups of 3 and just talk about it. And Susan.
One of the things that we talked about was when we were going through training, we would, as part of the training scenarios, we would sometimes have triads where there was a director, a directee, and an observer. And it was such a valuable part of the training process and helped us to gain greater insight and awareness. And yet when you become a director and you're no longer in training, you don't really have that observer role anymore. But in supervision, it's a sort of a form of observer if you are able to explain the setting and the circumstances and get some feedback.
Yeah, lovely. Yeah. Affirmation for me. Supervision can be that place of getting another perspective, another voice. Anyone else before I kind of, Rick?
Yeah, let me just say, someone mentioned in our group, Lori Carlson mentioned just the benefit of the way you do peer supervision, especially if you do it in a triad, for example, where there is a director, a directee, and a supervisor just observing. The benefit of doing that, she reminded us, and I all of a sudden I really resonated with this because my peer supervision doesn't take that format, but she said to be able to observe someone else doing direction in that kind of a peer supervision format that they use is a great blessing. So you could just see how other people do it. Of course, I see how other people do it when I have my own director. I've learned a lot from my several directors over the years, but just that opportunity in a peer supervision triad, for example, if we would take that or at least try that from time to time, seeing someone direct someone else, you do pick up a lot of things in that kind of a way as well.
Yep. Yeah, and my observation is there's a wide variety of ways that peer supervision is experienced. That can be good. It can also be a challenge if I'll name it that some peer supervision starts to move toward what I would call sort of a support conversation place, and the actual ministry of direction and how we're doing that moves down the priority, and the friendship part becomes more of a friendship group. And again, I would say I'm all for supporting each other as individuals. So the quality and the diversity of peer group supervision can also be something that helps but can also maybe not help. I mean, that's just my observation. Anyone else in general, how has supervision been good for you, either peer supervision or individual?
I've really enjoyed my peer supervision group. And I think part of the benefit of mine is that it's not purely a Protestant group. I have a Catholic nun and someone from the Episcopal Church, and they inform more of the spiritual direction. Even though I've been a spiritual director for 19 years, there's things that they bring to the group as far as perspective. And as far as for me, being able to inform them, because both of them, in situations where it has to do with marital relationships or such, they don't have, both of them are single. And so they don't have that benefit of understanding that type of dynamic. And so there's benefits that we have that we offer to each other.
Beautiful. I love that. Anyone else? The benefits of supervision for you?
I think especially in my intern phase of spiritual direction, it was helpful for the supervisor to help me create my own image of what a spiritual director was, rather than some cookie cutter image of what a spiritual director should be. So if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it really helped me gain confidence in the areas where I did have strengths. And then those areas where I did doubt, those could be areas I could do some spiritual direction in and see, why was that an area that was complicated for me.
So thank you for that. So, go ahead, someone.
I was just going to say, just like when we go to a director, there are ways that the director helps us notice God's movement in our life. My peer supervision group helps me notice God's movement in my life as a director. So I would focus at this point in my life on the self of those three things Lucy mentioned, on the self-reflection, because I was telling my small group that I must be a slow learner, because every single time I have to relearn, I'm not only giving as a spiritual director, I'm receiving. And if I didn't have that reminder in my supervision group, I think I would just march right past that and miss out on noticing what God's movement in my life as a director is. So I'm really grateful for my peer group for that reason.
Lovely. That's great, Doreen. Thank you. So what I want to do for the next few minutes is sort of take the conversation to a little different direction. So if we assume that it is a good practice to have some form of supervision in our life as directors, either, again, individual or peer, and we spent a few minutes naming the benefits. So we just say, okay, that's true. What I want to put on the table now are some observations and qualifications as it relates to supervision. And I think this will take our conversation at a little bit deeper level and maybe in a little more broad way. So I'm just going to dump a bunch of stuff into chat here, no slides, but I'm going to go through these statements, okay? But I'm just going to put them in there, and you can see them. And I'm just going to go, and we're going to pause as we kind of go through these statements, because I think, yeah. So the first thing is, when I think about supervision, here's an observation, that the frequency of supervision can and should change over time. For example, those supervisors among us who might be doing this ministry the first 1 to 5 years, I would suggest the frequency of supervision is higher than if you've been doing supervision for 19 years. Now, you maybe do supervision for 19 years and you are in a monthly peer supervision. That's for me, that's just totally great. But I think it's also fair to say that the longer that we do this ministry, the frequency of our need for supervision can change. It doesn't have to, but it can. So anybody want to kind of jump in on this, that the frequency changes over time, or can change. It doesn't have to, but anyone?
I don't know about the frequency, but the three of us in our group said we all started out in individual supervision
Right.
and then, graduated toward peer supervision. And that made sense to me. I don't know how often the individual supervision was, but I think it was really important in the beginning.
Yeah. And I could also offer, and I agree, Jackie, that not only the frequency, but also the dance between individual supervision and group supervision or peer supervision. Maybe in the first several years, it's a wise practice that the majority of our supervision is individual, because the learning curve is so steep in those first 5 years to have the intentional care of a supervisor. And then as we mature in the ministry, maybe once a year with an individual supervisor could be a benefit rather than monthly with an individual. And so it's maybe this combination of both individual and peer supervision that can bear the most fruit. Anybody else want to kind of make a comment on this?
I'm wondering if there's.
Go ahead, Brenda.
I'm wondering if there's a relationship between the number of directees you have as well. There, accumulation over time versus you have 1 or 2, that's it, or you have 17. That would be another thing, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, and I'll raise that in a few minutes because I think that does impact supervision. Lori, you're going to say something.
That was my exact point.
Okay. Yeah.
Great minds, Brenda.
Okay, good. The second statement, how spiritual direction is defined, how we define it, can impact whether supervision is valued or needed. Here's what I've been wondering, here's what I observed. If direction is defined closer to spiritual friendship, and everybody has their own definition, but if we define it more along the lines of spiritual friendship and the relationship is more mutual, supervision may not be that valuable or necessary. If the conversation is a mutual conversation and it's not what we would define as traditional spiritual direction, then supervision may not be the best resource. If, however, we define direction in a more traditional way, where one person is identified as the director and that person plays the role of the primary listener, then I think supervision in some form would be important. In particular, when you acknowledge that, and I think this came up in a conversation I had with Lucy one time. He said, anytime that one person talks more than the other person, you have an imbalance of power. When we as directors listen the most and the directee talks the most, there is a dynamic that enters into the relationship that needs to be stewarded and observed. And so supervision then would be important for those of us who do more traditional direction as we try to steward this power differential in the relationship. So that's one thing I've observed. Any thoughts on that? Anybody want to kind of talk about that? So our definition of direction impacts our view of supervision.
Could you say something more about power? It seems like you were saying that the one who is talking most has the power, but
We flip that around.
the one who is listening
Yes.
has the power.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I just was going to say that it seems like sometimes for me that people are coming to spiritual direction for many different reasons. And part of the process or the relationship becomes more like, are they looking for mentoring? Are they looking for discipleship? Are they looking for spiritual friendship? And not to say that I'm going to meet all those needs, but a lot of times I have a couple people who don't know scripture, that they just kind of want to talk about scripture and like, what does this mean? You know, that kind of thing. And so then that's the dynamic. And so to me, it feels like supervision is helpful in that, to kind of help me keep my own boundaries and that sort of thing. So.
Yeah, lovely. I like that.
Rob, thanks for mentioning this issue of power. It's a big deal. Like you said, the listener can have a lot of power. And I think supervision is really important for that power accountability, because at one level, we're actually, in a traditional sense of spiritual direction, we're refining the skills to gain more power in listening. And if that's not done in community with others with supervision, whether it's group supervision or one-on-one, I think we enter into a really dangerous space. And so with the previous person's comment, understanding what the other person wants and then addressing those wants also is a form of power. So even if you're talking through Bible passages, they're still coming to you as a center of power for them. And I think supervision is really critical in either of those. And it's helpful to just pay attention to our power differential in the room. The supervision does that. It's very valuable.
Anyone else before the next statement? So the next thing I've observed, that their cultural or ethnic realities may impact the perceived need for supervision or its relevance. Here's what I've been wondering. Spiritual direction has and still is mostly a white ministry. The practice of direction among persons or groups of color do not necessarily share the emphasis on certification and or more formal approaches to spiritual direction. Though they do, other groups of color, other directors of color, they do direction, but they just don't name it as direction. And for some, this dynamic shows up in how they understand the relationship, but then also how they understand the need for someone else to listen in on their spiritual direction. In other traditions or ethnic groups, it's much more organic, much more informal. And so your cultural background can impact whether you see a need for supervision. I just named that. Anybody want to, at least that's been my experience of talking with directors of color in the covenant. Some of them would say, you know, I don't really feel a need, Rob, for supervision. Well, tell me more. And it's this cultural piece that is present. So anybody have something else they want to add to this?
Well, I can comment.
Yep.
So I'm part of, I was telling my little group that I'm part of a new training program that is training bilingual spiritual directors to minister directly to the Latino community. And what I would find is that, and I should qualify this too and just say my husband's Latino. So, but what I'm finding is that the women, the Latino women who are going through this training program would very much seek supervision, because with historical roots in the Catholic Church, spiritual direction is associated with something the priest does. And so women very much are cautious about taking on that role, even though culturally they do it naturally in their communities. Okay, So,
Yeah.
but then when you say you're going to actually do it less organically, a more formal approach to it, then they really want the supervision because they want affirmation that what they're doing is okay.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that makes sense, but
Oh, it does, yeah.
so it's been an interesting thing to observe as they're going through the training.
Anyone else?
I don't know if this is applicable, but I'm aware of a group, I think based in Seattle here, that specifically offers free spiritual direction to women of color, and it's mainly a younger generation. And so it's, and I know they require supervision and that sort of thing, but I think that something like that, it could be also a generational piece too. That's
Nice. So
I wonder,
Yep.
I don't know if you are going to address or dress me down. I practice spiritual direction with people on the margins, homeless, or many I sit with, listen to, one-to-one sometimes, or in groups. And I don't say I'm a spiritual director. I say, I'm listening, I see you. Oh, God loves you. And so, and sometimes even in our cohort, the threesome, I was saying, I'm needing direction because there are people coming now who are using drugs and who are homeless or and have mental challenges, and I'm in over my head in a way. And what can I offer or not offer? And so I seek supervision along those lines. And I don't have somebody, but I pulled out a book that maybe even was used by the Covenant. I was trained through the Benedictines, and it's Norveen Vest, Still Listening.
Yeah.
And I'm finding that helpful.
Yes.
But I'm including here people of color that I'm with. And I frequently need to ask, could you tell me what you meant by that? I'm trying not to overstep my bounds, like I understand something that I don't understand.
Yeah. Yeah, many of you know Christina Burrows. She does a workshop on spiritual direction and intercultural intelligence, and it's a related thing. But as we sort of keep the focus on supervision, I think there are some within the covenant would say supervision is not a high priority. Some form of feedback, some sort of conversation happens that's culturally relevant for them, but maybe not traditional supervision. So the next thing, doing supervision can feel like one more thing. I'm curious to know on our call today, if any of us ever feel that. I mean, it's got to get on our calendar. And again, supervision, either peer or group or individual supervision. What are your thoughts about that? It takes time. I'd be curious to know the frequency of peer supervision among us as well.
Every other month in our group.
Okay.
Rob, I think it's so funny that I didn't know that people don't stay in individual supervision, because my program said you will always be in supervision. This is what you do when you're a spiritual director. So
Yeah.
I just have been in supervision for 10 years in individual supervision because I'm compliant to authority. That's what I was told to do. And it's also been fruitful in my life. It's also been fruitful in my life.
That's great, Lori. May your tribe increase. Well, Ricky, you can kind of weigh in. You sit at the vantage point of how many of our directors in our association wonder about the need for regular supervision. But certainly it's a time commitment. I mean, the other could money. Individual supervision. I don't know, Lori, maybe and others. It's not unless you found free.
Yeah, I pay for it.
Yeah.
How much do you pay, Lori?
Oh, well, I'm so grateful to my supervisor. Actually, it was $50 in 2012 when I started, and she's never raised it. So she still charges me $50. And she's totally in the Bay Area, so I'm sure she makes 180, for her regular work as a therapist. But anyway.
So maybe people can just stick in a chat. If you get individual supervision, just chuck in there what you pay for that. That would be helpful for people to see.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and most peer supervisions are that they're peer and there's no cost to the peer supervision. So I mean, but those could be barriers. The time it takes and the money for individual. The next statement I just want to make a brief comment about is, and we could share in the chat. Would you be willing to put in the chat how many directees on average a month you sit with? On average, how many directees do we sit with as directors?
I have to look. I never remember.
Don't get the cost of your supervision mixed up with this number, because that will really confuse us.
Yes.
6, 7, 8.
So as you keep making some chat comments, here's what I have noticed. There seems to be a different dynamic. If you are sitting with let's say 3 directees, the capacity to keep those kind of sessions more clear in your mind, the capacity to pay attention to the different themes that might be emerging for you as a director, it seems different than if you are sitting with 15 people on a monthly basis. And so my observation is there legitimacy to the concern that or the need if you're just sitting with a few people versus sitting with a lot? And that may impact the frequency of supervision and our perceived need for regular supervision. So anybody want to kind of weigh in on that?
Yeah, I do both individual and peer, and I find individual supervision after I got past a certain number of directees, like I have more cases where I kind of need to go deeper with the supervisor. And so that individual supervision really helps me to unpack a lot more. But I still really love peer supervision because it's there that I see the issues that I resonate with, but wouldn't have thought of on my own as I listen to other supervisors or other directors. So I feel like individual tends to go deeper, more unpacking, but peer is broader and helps me become more aware of other areas I would have overlooked.
Oh, thanks, Keith. Anyone else?
Kind of a counterpoint, Rob. Maybe supervision doesn't have as much to do with how few we have or how many we have, because all of us are individuals. All of us are persons of emotions and persons of feeling. Doesn't matter if I have 1 or 2 or 3 directees. There are still going to be things that come up that rub me or that give me pause. Anytime you're dealing with people, heck, as I deal with my wife, there are plenty of things that come up that give me pause. My beloved 46-year marriage wife, so I think that there's value to supervision. no matter the number, because things still come up because we're human. Just a thought.
Yeah, no, I actually agree with you, but as I listen to us as a movement in the covenant, every once in a while this comes up of, I'm just seeing a couple of people.
Yes.
And so supervision kind of moves off the radar screen. But I would agree with you, Rick. It probably should remain as part of a good practice for directors. Some comments in the chat. So the next statement, again, around supervision, it goes without saying that the experience of supervision for some may be less than ideal. What I'm hearing today is that it is ideal for many of us. But for some, maybe supervision hasn't been ideal. And I mean, it's not always easy. It's quite vulnerable, which is the next statement. Going to supervision at some point, it's a vulnerable activity. To take, our stuff, our biases, to look at our blind spots, to look at our feelings, our perceptions of ourselves and others, to look at our images of God as directors. That's really important to do, but it's a vulnerable thing. So for everybody who practices supervision on a regular basis, I would say yes and affirm that. But there are directors for whom supervision hasn't been the best. And I wonder if that contributes sort of to a reluctance to see that as part of the regular part of their rhythm. Has anybody had a bad experience in supervision? Willing to share? Or less than helpful?
A little twist on that, Rob. When I was learning about what supervision is, one of my teachers described her experience of supervision as like writing out a verbatim with just such an intense feeling of shame, and then just giving it over to the supervisor with her head down and her eyes shut. And I was like, no, thank you. That sounds absolutely horrible. I have absolutely no desire to be in a situation like that. And so I'm glad I just did it, right? I had to do it, so I did it. And that wasn't my experience of supervision. But I think the way we frame it as we're kind of pitching it to new people has a lot of influence.
Yeah, I agree. That's good. Well said. Then the last statement, then we're going to come back and just talk generally, is for some spiritual direction, continuing education is of equal or greater value than supervision. And I wouldn't pit the two against each other, but I certainly have heard that given the limited amount of time that most of us have, some of our association and some directors in the covenant and beyond move toward continuing ed, which is a good practice, rather than supervision. I think that's just another observation I have, and don't know what to make of that. I'm all for continuing education, but I wonder if that's the case for any of us as we think about supervision. Someone in the chat said you do both supervision and continuing ed. I think that's a good practice. So in general, I put a lot of material kind of out around some observations and qualifications. Let's come back and ask the question, from your vantage point, do you encounter people that might be resistant to supervision, and how do you respond to that? I think on our call today, all of us are committed, at least most of us are committed to some form of supervision. What are your thoughts about resistance to it? Maybe you've never encountered that.
Maybe I could say something that I was going to say at conclusion. It'd be more appropriate here now. The resistance that we sometimes hear in the ACSD leadership is not so much a resistance to the concept, but a resistance to it being a requirement for ACSD membership. And this is not because people want to be slackers. This is because some people come to a period of their life or a season in their life when they're not under supervision, either peer or individual. And so they feel they can't renew their membership in the ACSD, which prior to that, they have found that very valuable to them. So this is part of the conversation that we are having as a leadership team. Should it be strongly encouraged or should it be required? Because we don't want someone to to dismiss their opportunity to be a part of a significant group like the ACSD, just because they happen to be out of supervision at that time. So I thought that would be helpful to insert at this moment with this question.
What do you hear Rick asking? What's your sense of, or your observation?
You know, I think when you consider the general public and they're looking for a spiritual director and they want to have some assurance that, you know, anybody with spiritual direction, anybody can hang on a shingle and say that they're a spiritual director, and there's no body of organization that will tell them they can't do that. And so we have a high trust among ourselves in that way. But, you know, that would never fly with a counselor, with a physician, with anything else. There are very high standards involved. So I don't think that personally we should back away from saying this is a requirement, just because the bar, if you would, is pretty darn low in a way to say that you're a spiritual director, and people are free to do that still. But if you're going to be affiliated with an association that's holding to a certain level of professional standard, then I don't think that too many people would argue to say, yeah, you know what, it's supervision and that's not even defined. You don't even have to go monthly. It could be yearly. It's a pretty low bar. So in my humble opinion, that's kind of seeing that as a necessary part to become a membership is okay.
Thanks, Brenda.
I'm recently getting back into practice, so do not have a peer group or an individual supervisor at this point. So when it came to renewing, it was like there's no other option than individual peer. If there could have been an other or an explanation, or maybe if someone is saying, well, no, once a year, or it's this, as I've been hearing the conversations, it's not either or, and that even isn't a choice either. Just on the reality of the format of that. So just having a little more nuance would seem to be more realistic as I'm listening to the conversation here too.
Oh, thank you.
Rob, I'm wondering too, along those same lines of, you know, either or, I'm wondering if professional therapy would be something that could count as supervision, because you're still being self-reflective and dealing with your own stuff to make sure it's not getting into the direction sessions. But that's a method that could be funded by insurance policies, so the cost is not there. And I'm just wondering if is the point to look within yourself, or, you know, what is the true goal of the supervision to accomplish? Are there other ways besides individual and peer to meet that need?
Stephanie, that's a great comment. What yeah, go ahead, Deb.
On the CCSDN leadership, we have really felt like it was important that people be in supervision for the same reasons that Brenda mentioned. And I'm wondering if the question could be, you know, what are some of the issues around supervision? You know, if it's cost, are there a number of us who are supervisors who could offer a range of cost, rather than charging $60, we're willing to take between 20 and 60. Or, if we could make it available, but we kind of have to know what they're saying or feeling at that point. Is the problem that they can't find a peer supervision group? Is there some way we could help them with that? So
that's great. Nice comment.
And that's something I'm wondering about. I'm wondering about finding a peer group when physically within driving range, I won't be able to find a group.
I shared in my small group that we do our supervision groups online on Zoom. And so I'm sure there are a lot of them out there.
Coming in here today, I would have been very quick to say, yeah, I think it should be a requirement for membership in the association. But if what you said is true, Rob, that for people of color, for various reasons, this is not a high price. Well, it's not as common. I would want to remove that bar to their participation in the association.
And I don't have a large data sample on that. I'll be honest, Ken. But I think someone said earlier that, again, as I listen today, I think we all say supervision is such a valuable thing to be doing and to participate in. It's how do we create the pathways that make it easy for everybody who wants to participate in some form of supervision, online peer supervision, or how do we make that possible? And that's a little bit of what I'm hearing Rick ask as our president of this group. How do we just make this easier to do, more accessible?
And maybe it's also an issue of how many times a year.
Right.
It might be more doable if the requirement were 2 times a year you have supervision, or 3 times a year you have supervision, to still, kind of get that in between space. And being in a peer supervision group, we don't pay, but I'm astonished at how much people have to pay for individual. That's a huge expense for any size practice, especially if you're doing it once a month.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, I don't even know if this would be realistic or not, but I'm just wondering if there might be opportunities to provide some just one-time or limited supervision experiences alongside some of the other things that the organization is already doing. Or I'm thinking about, like, in the PSWC, there's a real active spiritual directors association. What I mean by this is, so for instance, at Midwinter, many of us have donated time at Midwinter to meet with people in ministry while we're at Midwinter. And is it possible to also provide some opportunity for some limited peer supervision also at Midwinter for those people who are volunteering their time to meet with people, or, just things like that. Or if there's retreats or other training opportunities, is there a possibility to tack some supervision, limited experience?
Yeah, wonderful idea, Susan. I like that.
Rob?
Yes, hi, Teresa.
I'm wondering if you can make more clear why you're looking for the requirement of supervision, so that if you both broaden and focus your definition, you might open up how people can maintain a level of ongoing professional development and an ethical way to stay healthy. so that if you include personal therapy, individual spiritual direction, peer supervision, individual supervision, and continuing education, all as options to maintain an ongoing professionalism and a way to work out your own stuff, that might give people more options. And because when we fill out our renewal, it's just one question: are you in direction? But if you listed those kinds of things and then ask the question, how often do you engage in these things? Because it's important for each of us to be engaging in something, because for us to think that we can do this all by ourselves without any input at all is foolishness. Yeah. So to broaden the question, to give people more options, I wonder if that might be helpful.
I think Rick is taking notes. Perfect. Well, what I like to do to kind of wrap up our time today. Today was I'm honored at the Weborg Center just to be a host today of this conversation about supervision among our association. I certainly hear, and I'm very encouraged by the affirmation of the really, really critical role that supervision plays in education, consultation, and self-awareness. And I wonder if it would just be good for us just to hear a couple of stories of how your supervisor or your peer supervision group just help you see something or name something in your own life as a director. So let's just take a moment, think about your last supervision session, peer group meeting, and think about how they encouraged you, help you see something new, help you process something. Then I'd like a couple of people to, if you're willing, to share how supervision touched your heart or your life the last month or two.
Well, can you hear me? I'll share. This didn't happen the last couple of months, but in my group, it's a group of peer people have been doing supervision for a really long time, so they're wonderful. And if no one has a CRF to bring, we'll often ask if someone wants to bring a personal issue and do group direction. And when I was going through a very difficult transition in my life, they offered to do a Quaker clearness committee with me. And it was just life-changing for me, just to have people hold me in that silence, in that space, and get clarity. And they've done that, things like that for all of us. It's been great.
Beautiful. Thank you. Anyone else?
Well, I did tell the breakout group that my last supervision was over a directory that I was starting to not like very much and feeling kind of judgmental that I didn't think he was being honest with me. And supervision really helped me a lot there. And I've met with him twice since I had supervision over that issue. And I don't have the same kind of attitude anymore. So
wonderful. Thanks for sharing, Terry. Friends, we want to let you go now. So may we leave this place finding God in all things. And may God bless you as you sit with others in this incredible ministry of spiritual direction.